In this video, we're going to cover mounting our rail to our feet. Prior to this, we've mounted our feet, we've put several in a line. We have kept them loose because we need to do some little minor adjustments before we attach physically the rail to the feet. Because again, our rail is a piece of metal and it doesn't really bend. So we need to make sure our feet are exactly lined up. And to do that, we keep them a little bit loose and tighten them once we attach our rail. The other part we will cover is grounding, putting our grounding lug on the rail. And we already know the location of that because we've already done our drawing before we've gotten on the roof. So let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is we have our rail next to our feet, and here is our racking manufacturer supplied hardware, stainless, 9/16 bolt or head on the bolt, and a 5/16 shaft. These rails are made to receive the bolt end, and it slides in and it's not going to turn once it's in there. So I need to put in one for every foot. So in this case I have 3 feet. I need to have a bolt in every position for every foot. They can be in there just loose because once I roll this up, I will then find my foot and insert my bolt into the slot right there. This is a slot because, again, I mentioned my roof here is not level, nor is it flat. So this 3/16 again of play this way allows me to make this rail be straight because, again, a piece of aluminum doesn't want to bend. So once I found my foot with my screw, then I can loosely just hand tighten this, go down the line, make sure all of my hardware is in place. Once I then can start to tighten things up in a straight and plumb fashion. Now that we have the rail loosely attached to the feet and the feet are loosely attached to the roof, I can now go back and do the final tightening for my feet into my roof. Once I have that, then I will then make sure my rail is straight and then do the final tightening of the foot to the rail. So I have my drill, and I'm usually going to not go all the way tight with the drill. I want to do my final tightening with a ratchet that I have because that way I actually have the physical feeling of how tight I need to be on that wood. What we don't want to do is we don't want to over tighten our lag bolt into our rafter and turn the hole into too large of a hole that won't hold our lag bolt anymore. Then we have an issue. The way to avoid that is by not over tightening our lag bolt. Here's my ratchet. And I usually give this about 2 grunts of tightness. Even though this rail is metal and rigid, over the distance it actually can sag if we have our feet not close enough together. So what we often find is a little bit of a sag. If we were to just tighten these, the rail would end up being sagging in the middle. What I want is it to be perfectly level. Again, my modules don't like to bend. So I can either get a string and I can go from end to end and do a visual line that way, or I can actually get down on the roof and look sighting down the rail and doing any minor adjustments I want to do to make sure that rail is going to be level, because this one sets a standard for all my other rails on my way down the roof. Right. God, thank you. At this point we have our feet mounted, we have our rails attached to our feet, we have trued up our rails to be straight, they're in the same line, and we're pretty much ready for our modules. Before we do our module mounting, we need to make sure we get our grounding set, because we'd like to have that done first so we could then hide it or cover the grounding with the modules. This is our lug that we'll be using, made by a company called Wiley Electronics, and is fast becoming the standard for racking, grounding racking in the industry. So it involves a lug, a place for our wire, and the grounding washer, one-time use piece of equipment. This thing costs you probably $4 or $5. But again, similar to the foot attachment bolt, this is a smaller hardware, only 7/16, and it's actually made to slide in this top channel and can slide all the way down to the position that we've already planned on being at from our drawing that we did before we got up here. This was the location where we need our grounding lug, and we'll need one of those for every single rail. Once I get them on there, I can go back and tighten them up to the required torque spec that's on the Wiley Electronics installation guide. Now that we have our lugs attached and torqued to the manufacturer's spec, then I'm going to take my grounding, my equipment grounding conductor. Typically, again, we're using number 6 Bear on here. Hopefully you remember that from class. And attaching it to the lug and giving another tightening for that. It's very easy to over torque these and bend this piece of equipment. Again, it's a $4 or $5 piece of equipment, and you want to treat it as such. Over torquing your ground actually decreases its effectiveness. It might be good in the short run, but in the long run, you're going to have problems. So, just follow the manufacturer's recommendation. They tell you to tighten it to 8 foot-pounds, you do that. To summarize what we just did in this video, we've mounted our rails to our feet. We've made sure that they are lined up with one another and level with one another and all in the same plane. Once we've established that, then we attached our grounding lugs and equipment grounding conductor on our way back to our pass-through box here. So at this point, everything's mounted in terms of our rails, and we are now ready to install our first module.